Cave Story? I've heard a lot about this little title over the years. It's one of the most popular indie games out there, featuring challenging but fair platforming, cool weapons, memorable characters, an amazing soundtrack, and some great boss battles. But for a long time I shied away from it due to the fact that it had a very high difficulty level. After a fair bit of mental debate, in early February I decided to be brave and bought Cave Story off the 3DS eShop. I quickly found out that it is a challenging game. I've only beaten it on easy mode so far. Despite that, I found myself enjoying it a lot, and within 3 weeks I considered it one of my favorite games ever. Heck, it inspired my countdown name and mascot. So in commemoration, I decided that for my first ever countdown, I will be talking about my 10 favorite bosses from Cave Story. The main factor I'm taking into consideration when ranking is how fun the boss is to fight, though a boss gets bonus points for appearance. Also, since this is my opinion, this list is almost certainly going to be different from yours. Finally, as this involves bosses, there are going to be some big-time spoilers, so beware. Alright, enough talk. Let's get this list started. Remember Toroko, that cute Mimiga girl who got abducted because Balrog and Misery thought she was Sue? Well, the doctor forced her to eat red flowers, which turned her rabid. No, not that kind of rabid. This crazed animal wants you dead. Rabid Toroko jumps around the room, throwing blocks at you every so often. The blocks are pretty fast and accurate and can't be destroyed, so your reflexes have to be up to snuff. In addition, flower cubs spawn from the blocks you dodge, but they aren't too tough to defeat. There's also emotional impact in this battle, as you're fighting one of the first characters you meet and befriend in the game. I found dodging the blocks and countering to be enjoyable and a good challenge, but this fight is only number 10 because Toroko also has periods where she stands around and does nothing, leaving her wide open to attack. Still, it's a fun fight, and that was enough for her to make it on this list. As you probably guessed from my mascot, Curly Brace is my favorite character in Cave Story. She's kind, brave, and always willing to lend Quote a hand and some extra firepower. But did you know she also makes for a great boss fight? Curly, or Quote if you're playing Curly Story, wields a machine gun that can deal a lot of damage if you're not good at dodging. However, Curly always stops in place and glows for a second before firing, so you have fair warning. In addition, there are Mimiga in this battle that jump around and do minor damage to you. Fortunately, they are easily defeated. Missiles are useless here since Curly has a shield that makes her immune to missile damage, something I find pretty cool. Even so, this fight is really easy, especially after you know Curly's pattern, which is why it's only number 9. Omega is cool. It's a huge, two-legged robot that hides in sand and has a pair of enormous jaws that remind me of Trapinch on top of its head. Given this, I guess Omega is based off an antlion, except for the fact that the jaws aren't for biting and instead spew out many rocks and projectiles. This fight has 2 phases. The first has Omega popping out of the sand and opening its jaws to unleash a torrent of projectiles. After a few seconds, it hides under the sand again and the process repeats. Naturally, you can only damage it when it's above ground, so you have to work fast. In addition, Omega's projectiles stick around for a long time after they hit the ground, so you must spend at least some of your time destroying them. After losing enough health, Omega's second phase begins. It pulls its entire body out of the sand and jumps around the room, opening its jaws to release more projectiles every time it lands. You'll have to alternate between destroying the projectiles and damaging Omega while constantly moving in order to avoid being crushed. This fight isn't too difficult, but I nonetheless enjoy it a lot. Plus, it's kind of funny battling this guy while carrying a dog over your head. It never gets old. You've journeyed through the last cave and defeated all of his underlings. It's finally time to face the Doctor himself, but he isn't going to make it easy for you. This Nadman created the red crystal out of the red flowers, and he's about to unleash its power on you. The Doctor's main attack is firing 2 beams of red energy that travel forward in a spiral motion and gradually spread apart. Sometimes, however, he surrounds himself with a whole bunch of these red energy beams and fires them. They bounce all over the place before disappearing, and they can be tricky to dodge. The Doctor constantly teleports around the room, and the red energy beams completely negate your attacks, so this is a very mobile battle. You usually only have a short window of time before and after the Doctor teleports, so this can be a lengthy fight without the spur. After you empty his HP gauge, the Doctor becomes unable to control the red crystal's power and transforms into a Frankenstein-esque monster. In this form, the Doctor still teleports, but he also jumps around and charges at you. In addition, he can summon a huge swarm of bats that move very quickly and fill up a large portion of the screen. The Spur and the Nemesis are your best friends in this battle. The Doctor doesn't have a lot of HP in either of his forms, but he is still challenging to face, especially since he is part of the boss rush at the end of the game. And since he's Cave Story's main villain, finally taking him down feels very satisfying. So why is he so low? Simple. I just found 6 other fights to be more fun. Like Balrog, Misery is a character that appears to you a fair few times throughout Cave Story. However, you don't get a chance to fight her until near the end of the game. Before you can get to the Doctor, you must defeat her. Misery floats around in the air and uses all sorts of different magic. She'll drop huge blocks on your head, unleash black blasts of energy, surround herself with a rotating shield that turns into a small group of bats, and conjure lightning. She also likes to teleport, and since she's such a small target, she can be difficult to hit. To top it all off, her attacks become stronger as she takes more damage, so the fight gets to be pretty frantic in its final stages. I found Misery to be a fun challenge and a great test of your skills before you move on to defeat the Doctor. Plus, I've always had a soft spot for characters that use magic. Misery, you may have caused a lot of, well, misery to most of the Cave Story cast, but you're still cool. I'll bet this next boss caused at least a few people to have a heart attack on their first playthrough of Cave Story. You're moving through the final hallway of Labyrinth W, defeating Gouties and Armors, when this huge X-shaped mechanical thing comes to life and attacks you. Sure, you passed by it earlier, but even if you were suspicious of it, there was no warning of when it would come to life. Anyways, Monster X is a very simple attack pattern. It drives around the hallway for a while, and then it stops in place before opening up its central chamber and firing projectiles for a few seconds. The first thing you'll want to do is defeat any remaining Gouties and Armors, as they can be annoying. You have to avoid Monster X's treads as it drives around, as they do a lot of damage. When it opens its central chamber to fire, you have to destroy the 4 small green cores inside. Once they're all gone, Monster X changes its projectiles to these flying green missile things that travel in a circular pattern, and its eye-like structure becomes vulnerable. Other than the changed projectiles of the target, the fight remains the same. Once the eye is gone, Monster X is defeated. I'm not exactly sure why I like this boss so much, especially since it's rather simple. Maybe it's because it looks freaking cool, or maybe I just love to destroy huge machines. Also, there's one more interesting thing about this boss. After you defeat it, a giant cat flies out of the remains. That's right, a cat! I guess it was the one operating Monster X? Whatever the case may be, it's very amusing, if weird. In my experience, energy cores usually aren't all that threatening. They just kind of sit there while various security measures act to protect them. But this core is an entirely different story. It seems to be a living being as it moves around and actively shoots at you. It also has multiple smaller versions of itself floating around, which add to its firepower and can help protect the main body. And sometimes, the room completely fills up with water, severely hindering your movement and adding to the challenge factor. Occasionally, the core will blow you backwards, and when it starts to get weak, it fires large energy blasts that are highly damaging to you and your weapon. Curly assists you in this fight, which is cool, even though she isn't all that useful. Not only that, the music track that plays in the background is one of the best in the game. All of these factors combine for a very enjoyable and challenging boss fight worthy of the number 4 spot. Ironhead is probably one of the easiest bosses in Cave Story. So why is he this high up? Well, first of all, this list is based on fun factor, and Ironhead brings that in droves. This fight takes place in the island's main artery, and it plays like a 2D space shooter. You can move freely through the water, which is a necessity because blocks and fish are constantly flying or swimming at you. Ironhead himself doesn't do much. He just swims around and occasionally spits out a few blasts of energy, but he's a relatively small target, so you have to position yourself carefully. Another really cool thing about this boss is that he was originally from Ikachan, another game by Studio Pixel. Not only that, if you defeat him without getting hit, you'll earn the alien medal, which is engraved with Ikachan's silhouette. Don't you just love references? And you thought the core was crazy before. The best word to describe the battle with the Undead Core is chaotic. You're facing not only the freaky-faced core itself, but also a possessed Misery and a rabid Sue. Oh, come on! It's bad enough that joke was used once, but twice? Can't I talk about frenzied Mimiga without these freaks showing up? Anyways, a lot of stuff fills up the screen during this battle. The Undead Core will launch projectiles whenever it shows its hideous face and constantly spawns miniature versions of itself. Misery will periodically summon huge swarms of small enemies, and Sue will repeatedly attempt to mangle you. You only have to defeat the Undead Core itself to win, but taking down Misery and Sue can really cut down on the number of attacks you have to dodge. The core's face is its weak point, but it is only vulnerable for short periods of time, so you have to be quick. However, because everything wants you dead in this battle, this is easier said than done. This fight ranks this high mostly because of how much fun I had blasting and dodging everything that came at me. But as great as this battle was, there's still one more that tops it. Hoo boy. This next boss makes me shudder as I remember just how difficult and yet satisfying he was. A boss I'm not likely to forget anytime soon. My favorite boss in Cave Story is Balos. Oh my gosh, this battle is incredible. You control both Quote and a nemesis-wielding Curly and face a sorcerer wielding out-of-control magic while the island is plummeting from the sky. That is one cool premise. We haven't even gotten to the fight itself. Balos has 3 phases, each of which puts all of your skills to the test. In his first form, he will chase after you at high speed, produce indestructible damaging waves of bones, and launch bolts of lightning. Balos' second form begins once his HP is depleted. He gains a new HP bar and turns into a giant rock head that jumps around the screen while an endless horde of bats flies overhead. His eyes are his weak point, but because they are so small compared to the main body, hitting him isn't easy, especially if you're unfamiliar with the fight. When his second form is defeated, Balos sprouts 8 eyes around his body and flies around the room, dropping skull missiles. When he floats close to the ground, you have to squeeze between 2 of the eyes to avoid being crushed. When all of the eyes are defeated, Balos flies to the center of the room, summons platforms for you to stand on, and causes spikes to come out of the ground. From here on, an endless army of buttes swarm in and shoot arrows at you while you try to finish Balos. Yes, you can be cheap and just stand on his eye while firing a ton of missiles to finish him off easily, but where's the fun in that? This boss is easily the hardest in the game, but even when I lost to him, which happened a lot, I always found myself saying, "Alright, one more try." And when I finally did defeat him, I had an overwhelming sense of satisfaction, like I had accomplished something great. The only problem I have with Balos is that he had almost no build-up throughout the game. Most of his backstory is presented to you through the text while you travel through the Bloodstained Sanctuary, the last level of the game. In the grand scheme of things, though, that's just a minor complaint, especially considering how amazing the fight is. I'm the Polar Star, and I wish I picked up the amazing cave story a long time ago.